Greetings, brothers and sisters. So, have some personal news. I don't know, personal, but situational news. um, it's frigid cold here. It was something with wind chill below 30, 40 or something like that. The wind is brutal. We have to go out and deal with our cows and our chickens and, walk the dogs every once in a while. Dogs don't like it out there. And it was 9 degrees below zero the other day. Today it was like -1 this morning. And last night I turned down the heat to go to bed, and I went back. I said, well, it's kind of cold in here. And I turned it down to, like, I don't know, 65 or whatever it was. And it was 62. And I realized the heat wasn't working. We have something set up, like there's, whatever those things are, the air conditioning units that are outside. And that, we got something new maybe a year ago. The old one broke. And I think we have a brand new furnace. It looks fairly new as well. And when it gets to a certain level of cold, there's a furnace in the basement that runs on propane. And so my wife and I went downstairs, and it seemed like it was running, but cold air was coming out. And so we ended up having to bring the dogs. One of our dogs threw up on the bed, so I had to, clean all that up. We had to wash all the bedding. And then she was sick, and the other dog's eye swelled up from being outside. So it was like one of those things where, we didn't want her to throw up again in the middle of the night and have to deal with that. But our room's the warmest room for whatever reason. It has a couple of vents in there. It just seems to be warmer than the other room. So we got the dogs in, and I went out this morning, and I was heating up my chai, and I went down to the basement, checked the furnace again, and it smelled a little bit like propane. It was 50 degrees in the house, so it was 53 degrees, and it seemed colder. So, it's going to keep on dropping because there's no heat. So I went down to the furnace, and it smelled a little bit like propane. I went back up, and the burner we have a gas propane burner for our stove, and that was off, and it stunk like propane, right? Which it still does, which sucks. Because I turned it low, and what I realized was that there was some propane in the propane tank, but it was very low. Like, you couldn't put the burner on high. When it was on high, it was on low. If you turned it on low, it would turn off. So I'm like, oh, man. So I went outside and checked the gauge on the propane, which we have a keep fill. Like, they're supposed to keep it full all the time because our stove and our heat, rely on it. And there was none. It was empty. And so that happened. So we're out of heat, and we really can't cook on the stovetop. So going to bed last night, realizing we're out of heat, I was like, well, that, we can deal with that to whatever degree, right? We have, warm clothing, and I've been through like this stuff before. I mean, it sucks because it's Christmas and getting service before next week. We basically have to get people out here Christmas Eve, and, God knows how many people are suffering similar circumstances because it's so frigid. Things don't work when it's cold. I believe that we have hot water, so we had it yesterday, and I don't think that's going to be an issue. But going to a hotel with the dogs sucks, and then, all of it, right? So, I mean, we'll still have to come back because the cows need to be fed, and their water is like they'll tip it over, which sucks. They just, the younger cow just butts stuff with their head, and she's always tipping over the water. We have a water that you plug in, but they need water regularly, and, like a couple times a day it needs to be checked. And the chickens need water and food. They're basically just in their chicken house. We could fill up their food and give them fresh water, but they need to be checked on every day. So I don't know. That's our situation. So like it is Christmas, and tomorrow's Christmas. Is it tomorrow? Yeah. So there might not be any videos. I have a Journey series video that I'll probably release tomorrow, and I'm going to make a video today. I can work out of a hotel, but it's more difficult because my wife and I will be sharing the space or whatever. and we'll be back and forth, and it's just dealing with all that stuff. So more than likely we'll stay here. Like there was a moment where my wife wasn't sleeping and I was sort of meditating. I wasn't really asleep. Sometimes it happens. And I said, "You okay?" She's like, "I gotta get socks, right?" So I was like, "Yeah, so do I." So we both put on socks. And then at some point I went out, and I think one of the dogs was then Tulsi, who had been thrown up, was dry heaving. So we got her off the bed, so we didn't have to wash that again, which would have sucked, and all that. And I went and got a hat. I've slept out in camping where it was fairly cold, where you need a hat, and I mean it was cold enough that you're fine in your sleeping bag, but your face and your head were cold. There's no heat. It's a tent isn't you know it stops the wind, but isn't heavily insulated. And so the issue is being able to cook food. We had some of those propane burner things. Maybe we have to go to Walmart and get those, which is going there on Christmas Eve and all that stuff. Is a real bummer. Those small gas propane stoves that have the cans. We have them somewhere because we had them for just emergency stuff, but we have to go find all that kind of stuff. My wife's on the phone with the propane people, and like I said, we have a keep fill order, and I think they come like 3 times a year, 4 times a year, maybe 5, maybe. I mean, it's very seldom. They leave a receipt. Like I've never seen them, and they leave a receipt. They come and they top off the tank, the propane tank, because we need it for our stove and for our heat. And both those things are kind of important. And it's a pretty big size tank, so I don't know what happened. I don't know if there's shortages or they're having issues with staffing or whatever. But you can't let something like this happen. I mean, you can, but you shouldn't. Like it's not. We're getting this the day before Christmas, right? And it's their fault 100%, right? Like it's not our fault. I mean, we don't check the gauge regularly because it's just always full. Like that didn't even cross our mind when the heat wasn't working. We called the stove, the people that we have some sort of we have a warranty on the equipment, and like we have some sort of service plan for the central heating air conditioning unit and the propane stove, the propane furnace downstairs or whatever you call it. So yeah, that's what's happening here. So let's get into. I want to talk about Qbies a little bit, and then there's a few other things. It's going to be a shorter video today, obviously, not just because of this, because there's just less news when during the quiz. This is Christmas weekend, so it's not only just Christmas, but there's less news on the weekend, and there's less news on on holidays as well. Less whatever's going on, and the big news is that it's cold as F outside for most of the country. It isn't going to get better for a while. So the first thing I want to show you is something I saw from the show Chuck. It aired in January in 2012, so it was long before anything happened with Q and the Q movement. Okay, so I have a little bit of an update. Our whole day was about dealing with this propane thing. And so, kind of interesting story. My wife had said, how lucky we were. We were both talking about this, how grateful we were to be able to be in a warm house during this Arctic freeze. And I was talking about how people live with this all the time, right? You get used to the cold, your body adapts, but still, right? But when we get the house heated back up, we'll be even more grateful. So we, go to this farmer. We get grain from a person kind of like an Amish person, but they're not. They're German something or others. They have more modern technology, but they have good quality feed for our cows and raw milk and other things, right? We had to go see them, and we had to get space heaters. And so the house just got progressively colder, or it just sort of wore away at us, right? So it was at 50 earlier. Now it's at 53, so it's gone up by 3 degrees. It's 4 o'clock right now. And so to put this in perspective, I can wear shorts in 60-degree weather. I wear shorts in the house most of the time. Like I usually don't wear socks even in the winter. We keep it around maybe 68, 69. Occasionally it goes up to 70 for a little while and it gets too hot. We have forced air heat, which is usually kind of dusty and dries you out. So it's my least favorite heat. And we usually turn the heat down to 65 at night. And our bedroom, my wife's and our bedroom, is probably the warmest room in the house for whatever reason, because there's a small bathroom with a heater, with a vent in it. Both the vents are closed in our in our room, the bathroom one and the one in our room, because it seems to be the hottest room in the house, right? Although my kids complain often that it's too hot in their rooms, right? And where the thermostat is near a cooler area, breezeway, So like I said, most of the time I wear shorts. If it's really cold, I'll put on a long sleeve t-shirt over my other t-shirt. And then once in a while I'll wear sweatpants. Usually my wife and I are watching TV with like an old comforter, and that's about it, right? So this should give you an indication that I can wear in 50-degree weather outside. I usually would wear like sweatpants, thin sweatpants, and like a long sleeve t-shirt. Occasionally I wear a sweatshirt or something like that. Certainly no gloves or hat, right? Maybe if I just got my hair cut or something, it's windy, I don't know. And in the winter, we have these snowsuits my wife got us. And last year we were walking around the pasture. We'd walk a couple of miles in our, heavy boots, and I wear like a balaclava hat with another hat over it. And I have a dicky, it's like a fake turtleneck. I don't like turtlenecks except when I'm working or I'm walking around in the winter. And sometimes I drive the tractor. Like if there's snow on the ground, I'll get the tractor out and clear the snow. Or sometimes I'll do work in the winter. And the tractor has no windshield or anything like that. So the wind just comes in. And I can wear what I just described. These snowsuits are really great. They keep us warm. And, unless it's really, really windy, and just my face will get cold, right? Because of that's the only thing that's exposed to the wind. And so we walk outside. Sometimes it's like 10 degrees. I think even it's been around 0 and we've gone for walks. And we were outside chasing a chicken last night and the wind hit me. And I was just like, it was just, it was like a knockout blow. We wanted to move we had 3 chickens in a small coop. We wanted to move to a big coop so they would be warmer collectively. And 2 of them escaped and were running around the Arctic freeze, and they got behind these bushes, and the wind hit me, and I was dressed like I was saying, right? So it's a different kind of a cold. And the house was down to 50 degrees. And when I went downstairs to check the furnace into the basement, which is always coldest part of the house, I realized the basement was warmer than the house, right? And I was like, oh, that isn't good. And so I was working in the kitchen. I was pulling supplements for the week. Like I pull them every 7 days, and this is when it happened. And I was doing other things in the kitchen, and I was wearing a pair of socks. I had a hat on and a jacket on. And at some point I was wearing gloves. I was taking my gloves on and off. And I realized my feet were frozen, so much so I got into the tub later on to warm up, and my feet were numb. Like, it took a while for them to sort of thaw out. And so one pair of socks wasn't enough. I had to put on a thick pair of socks over those socks. So it was kind of cold in the house, a lot colder than 51. It was like 50 degrees, 51 degrees. And it's going to get colder tonight. It was going to get colder tonight because we went to bed and it was 63. Because I turned the heat down to 65, and I looked at it. I was at 62 last night. And so it's already 10 degrees colder. And it's going to get cold again tonight, get below freezing. And so all that, right? And, the wind's still howling. So my wife was on hold, and I was on hold for a little bit because we were calling the propane people. And there was emergency number was disconnected, and we tried a couple of different numbers, and she was on hold on and off for a couple of hours, getting really frustrated. She called another propane company, and, it just, they couldn't do anything because we weren't customers, and I was starting to wonder, this propane company we have has never been an issue. They have kept our tank full. We have a gas stove that runs, our stove runs on gas. And then we have, it's like a backup furnace, like I said. If it gets below 10 degrees, it kicks in. And then instead of using whatever that thing is, the central air thing that's outside, it runs on propane. And these guys show up and fill up the tank, and there's never been a time where we were even close to being empty. And I start talking about it because we can't contact them. Their website is like a joke, and they seem to almost like disappeared. Of course, it's Christmas Eve, but my wife ended up talking to an answering service, and she didn't know what was going on either. I was wondering if they were having employment issues. So many people have been struggling with finding employees, which we've talked about here. People have left comments, and we know that their businesses are going out of business because they can't find people to work, and businesses are going out of business for a number of reasons. And maybe this business is just crapped out, and they didn't let anybody know because as far as we could tell, there was no way to contact them. Right? We left this message, and they were possibly going to get back to us, we thought, later on next week. So we went driving around looking for space heaters. They didn't have any at Home Depot or Lowe's, nothing at Tractor Supply, which we went to pick up cow grain and other things. And so my wife was trying to think of people she could call to see if they had space heaters or whatever. And we were planning to go to Costco originally, but we were both so tired. But I said, let's call Costco first. And we called them, and they had whole room heaters. It's Costco, so they'll be cheap. So we went out to Costco, and we got a bunch of these things. And the woman who was ringing us up said, did something happen to your heat? And she was like, definitely concerned. We wearing these, and we have our big snowsuits on, right? Walking through Costco, our big farm boots, and but these heaters will heat up a whole room, and we have a greenhouse that we've been thinking about getting heaters for, and whatever. It's not really important, so we would have a use for them after this time, right? But anyways, so we ended up getting that, which was a huge relief because there was none available anywhere, right? It's Christmas Eve, and it's like the day that I would never shop. Like, I don't go shopping normally. Everything I do is now on Amazon, and we're gonna have like basically a non-existent Christmas, right? My son's away visiting my ex, and he doesn't even care about Christmas anymore. So it was just basically me and my wife, and we were just like glad to not have to do anything. Like, I like Christmas lights when other people put them up on their house, right? My days of decorating trees and those things. Like, I used to love it when I was a kid, and I like seeing it, but I like seeing it when somebody else does it or walking through a mall or whatever it is. One day a year, I usually get this feeling, what I call Christmas spirit. Like, I usually get it. When I was a kid, I got it a lot. Like, it's a condition. It's a spiritual condition. It's a feeling. And really, Christmas was so non-important this year. We didn't, I didn't want anything, whatever, which is usually the case. Like, we have limited storage space in our house. We got an old farmhouse. Good. It's well insulated, which has been a real gift, but it's, there's not a lot of room to store stuff, and junk just, accumulates. So only things that I, need or we need, it's just not a big deal for us, right? Christmas isn't a big deal. And so going out on Christmas Eve is like the worst, and we're tired, and we're, frazzled. My wife is dealing with being on hold, and we have no idea. We're thinking about, well, did this company just collapse or whatever? Like, we don't have any ability to connect with them till next Monday, till Monday. So we're at least not going to have heat for those 2 days, right? And, we need, it's not that great driving on the road, so we don't want to go out for dinner, but we have some of those small propane, butane emergency or camp stoves, that you use on camping. And we had like some old like hot plate, so we could cook on those things. Our oven still worked. There's things that we had, but it's just like one of those things, right? Where, we're just a little bit worn out, and trying to just figure out how we're going to make it through this thing. And it's really cold. The dogs are cold. My dog Buddy is shivering, and bringing them outside to go to the bathroom, like they don't just go out there and get it done and run in the house. Like they linger too long and then they both get cold, right? And so and he was cold inside the house. He was shivering. And so he's actually sleeping on my bed and he's shivering even now. We ended up getting them like little doggy sweaters, which I don't like those things, but we had to. Like, it was like one of those things where, it was like Buddy was shivering the whole time, even when we were in the car and we had the heat cranked up, right? So finally we're getting all that stuff and we're heading home from Costco. And my wife and I, we stopped at Whole Foods to get some food or whatever to for dinner, like pizza and stuff. And my wife comes by and said, "Oh, I just got called by the propane company. They're delivering tonight, right?" And I'm like, "Well, that's a Christmas miracle." We were both shocked that happened, and they were really apologetic. And they've never been an issue, right? We've been here I think for 5 years, and there's never been any thought that the propane would run out, right? We never had to call them. We never had a situation where it ran out or anything like that. And so that's my story, right? And it was, it really makes you appreciate how much we rely on the system. Like if the system collapsed and people didn't have heat, I mean, when we go through some kind of Arctic freeze like this, but even a regular winter, I mean, it's tough to survive. It sucks the life out of you. Like I said, my feet were numb from the kitchen floor, and it's only 50 degrees. Like what happened when it gets freezing? All the pipes, and we're worried about the pipes bursting and all that stuff, and it's only one day. Like what if it was, a month or something we had to go through this, right? And there are people in much colder areas, I mean, that live with, a level of constant dependency on, on whatever the system to keep them warm. Just like in the desert, there's a water shortage, and the system has to pump the water to you, and without it, you're screwed, right? I've known about this kind of stuff for a while, like how much we're dependent on the system. I mean, it's great to have a wood-burning stove. We used to have one in my original farmhouse, and that works, but it gets really cold. It's hard to heat the whole house with even a really good stove because the fire creates a vacuum, and it pulls cold air from the rest of the house, right? And if you have cracks or little, areas where cold air can flow through, and oftentimes the windows are so cold that the cold air just comes flying in, even if they're sealed really well. But anyways, that's my gratitude story, and our Christmas miracle, our propane. We don't have it yet, and we're not sure if the pilot light's lit. Plus, when I came upstairs from the basement, and I was heating up my chai, and I realized the burner was off. It had leaked out some propane, so we have that smell, that gas smell, which sucks in the house, and we don't want to open everything up and let the air flow through because it's already so cold in here. But it's a Christmas miracle. So I just have a few things to say about the Qbies. I was going to cover some more stuff, but I'll wait till I'm just so tired now and it's late. I'll just wait till I don't know, 2 days from now or whatever, Monday. Anyways, here's the Qbie stuff.
Interesting. These are the blueprints to DARPA. Morgan, if the CIA had a Q working for them, he'd be working right there. And I've seen enough intersect white rooms to know that they have one.
Okay, so this was from that show Chuck, that spy show Chuck that's kind of cheesy, and it's a show where, it's a lot of plot holes, a lot of stupid stuff, ridiculous things. It's a comedy, but it's very heavy with all the things that we talk about here. And it came out years and years ago. So this episode was from January 2012. It's the second to last episode, season 5. I think it's episode 12. And so it's towards the end of this thing. And the whole show is about mind control. They have this thing called the Intersect, and it's all this Illuminati and, all that kind of symbolism, Freemasonic symbolism that goes into this, the single Illuminati eye, and this guy Chuck gets this Intersect put in him, and it has this basically mind control, a little bit of Matrix, a little bit of, MK Ultra stuff mixed together. And there's all these things, plot lines and storylines that are consistent with a lot of the things that people talk about today, right? There's rogue factions of the whole whatever it is deep state like stuff, which is which is part of the whole Qbie. There's Qbie stuff in this, right? Things that would be predictive programming for Qbies. And then he's talking about a Q working for the CIA, right, to do with this Intersect project, this mind control project, right, which is quite frequently happening, where there are, references to a character named Q in something that has intelligence community, mind control, psychological operation implications, all this predictive programming. And let's go to that. I have more about that here. So when you search for the name Q, a nickname Q for movie characters, the number one is the Q character from the James Bond movies, which is a character that creates all the technology and fancy gadgets and toys for the James Bond, for the main character James Bond. But there's also other characters. This guy Q from Star Trek. In Star Trek, he's an extra-dimensional being of unknown origin who possesses unmeasurable power over time, space, and the laws of physics and reality itself. I really didn't watch that, so I'm not familiar with the character. I knew that the character exists. There's John Q. It's a Denzel Washington movie. And there's just lots of characters named Q, ones that I can't think of, often related to being a spy and spying in these things. Another character, E equals Q and X, Edith Head and Incredibles. That this character, Edith, was also she was involved in the fashion industry. And she was, she made these weapons for the Incredibles. Suits, technological stuff as well. And she was inspired from, the character was inspired from the Q character in the James Bond films. Then there's Brian Quinn, who is one of the 4 Impractical Jokers, or 3 Impractical Jokers as it is now. And I like that show. My wife and I really enjoy it. It's a funny show. But he's always wearing devil shirts, and he's known as Q. They say over and over again, here he is wearing a Devils jersey, the New Jersey Devils. Like I said, he's often wearing these shirts, these devil shirts. And so, there's that, right? And then there's the Q level clearance that has to do with the Department of Energy and national security, military intelligence, right? And that's what the whole Qbie movement comes from, right? This idea of somebody, named Q, who is nicknamed Q or QAnon, because they have Q level clearance and they're there giving you information for some reason, right? Be attacked, right? And they got like the bare basic understanding of what the truth movement was about. Most of them were, right-wing people, Trumpers, not really capable of abstract thought, not really understanding complex problems, people who are, disgruntled and, uneducated and just whatever they were. I mean, not all of them, but that was the general sense, right? Not people who are known as great thinkers or, balanced, emotionally, psychologically healthy people. And I don't care what you believe. Like I said that. I don't care what other people believe. I'm not here to convince other people. I'm not here to argue with people about it, because everybody gets fooled in life. Everybody trusts somebody they shouldn't trust. Everybody, believes things that aren't true. Everyone in the truth community at some point or another relays information or believes information that turns out to be disinformation or just straight up lies or whatever it was, right? We all did it. We all, been a part of that. In the beginning, I put information out that I didn't check for myself because I trusted that other people in the truth community were vetting stuff, right? And if everyone believed it, then there must have been somebody along the line who vetted it, right? Who, did the research on it and figured out whether it was true or not. But that wasn't the case. For most information in the truth community, somebody just puts some information out there with some, weak evidence. Sometimes it's just straight up disinformation. And then everybody starts sharing it because they want to believe, right? And there was this idea that I had, and pretty much everyone that comes in the truth community has, where you don't trust the official story anymore, but then you trust the truth community, right? Because now it's like this binary way of thinking. Well, if these guys are liars, then the truthers must be truthers, and they're not, right? There's so much disinformation. There's as much disinformation, and it's a wider scope, right? Because the mainstream media has a very limited bandwidth of what they can talk about. Whereas people in the truth community, we don't have editors, we don't have, oversight, and the imagination's the limit, right? So, I mean, it's not very much accountability in the truth community, and you have anonymous people putting out information, salacious accusations or whatever it is, right? Without any thought about checking it or responsibility of, how that might affect other people and, all of that, right? And so what I learned, and I've talked about this quite often, is I stopped announcing things like they were fact. Like this, these theories that were out there were fact because they weren't, right? And, they were oftentimes, it was easy to disprove these theories, things that were shared in the truth community, especially stuff coming from the far right, that there's, people out there, not just disinformation agents, but there's people in foreign countries that realized that if you said things to the right-wing people who were, highly triggered, they would believe it. And so they would run ads. These were people who were just opportunists, and they would make American money. They would run, videos from their country, and they would make American, dollars, in terms of the advertising and things that they would get in a country that was lower than, the currency was valued lower than American dollar. And so they could make a lot of money doing that. And they would just make things up, make things, again, salacious that would, that would be clickbait things. I mean, there was, that as well. And so with the Qbies, anything, the more crazy it sounded, the more it was shared. And that affected all of us in the truth community. So let's say I made a reasonable video about Tom Hanks, talking about his Jimmy Kimmel appearance, where he had the toddlers and tiaras thing, some of these other things that were based in fact. There was that guy Isaac Cappy that came in and just started making shit up too. And so, there's people like that, right, who would say things without backing it with fact, and it just took off. And so, for one, you were competing against, like, reasonable videos were competing poorly against videos that were, just made up stuff, exaggerated, whatever it was, without fact checking, without anything. And so that was the first part. And that was, not only Qbies, but lots of people in the truth community. They wanted sensationalistic things. But then when you didn't, go far enough, if I didn't say the things that Qbies wanted to hear, they would say things like, oh, you don't even know what's going on, right? You're a shill, or you're a shill. Like, and that's, that was their answer for everything. If you didn't agree with them, you were a shill, which is unbelievably dangerous, right? Like, that's the same kind of behavior that we should all be freaked out about by the government and the people running the system. If you don't believe what we believe, you're a traitor and a murderer, right? That's the what's happened with the vax, right? Well, if you're not wearing your mask and you're not taking the vax, then you're a spreader, a super spreader, and a murderer, whatever. And so that kind of thinking based in no factual evidence is what we're supposed to be against, all of us, right? We're supposed to be against, jumping to conclusions and being unreasonable and forcing an agenda based in faulty data and then, emotions and the rest of it. But that's what the Qbies were doing. So again, I don't care what they believe. I don't care what you believe. But when you get goofy and force it on the rest of us, and then you embarrass a whole movement that many of us created, that's why I call them Qbies, like newbies. Because many of us had been around for a long time, and we went through this, right? We learned our lessons. We learned, all right, there isn't some purity to the truth community that we can trust what's put out there by individual people that are liars and manipulators and maybe disinformation agents. And so when you know that exists and somebody's anonymous and they're making big claims that they're Q level governmental clearance, right? Then you have to look at it like, all right, I want to believe this. I want to be a part of this community, but we can't, say this is a slam dunk. We have to just, calm the F down. And the Qbies didn't. That was the problem. They didn't calm the F down. They just, got worse and worse. And then ultimately they were used as a weapon against free speech, basically, right? I mean, this is what happened because of they're being duped, and with the Trumpers as well. Some guy who's a flim-flam businessman who has questionable business ethics and, an egotistical, narcissistic personality. It was a known entity. Trump was a known entity, that he wasn't like some hero that you were trying to make him out to be. Like, he was an interesting character. I liked him as a character, but he wasn't somebody you could trust. He wasn't somebody that's going to put you in front of himself. He's a selfish person, right? He was going to take care of himself first. I mean, he's a narcissist, clearly, like anybody can see it. And so why would you trust that guy? Like the way that you trusted him. The same thing with the Q thing. Q thing's even worse because it's anonymous. Could be anybody. And the most reasonable explanation is that Q is a governmental operative. And, the biggest piece of evidence, I mean, aside from the government has all the resources, it's the kind of thing the government, the intelligence community does. This is exactly the way that they manipulate people. And so, I mean, all of it like screams this is a psychological disinformation operation. I mean, everything that you see, it's just a pattern of behavior. But on top of it, they never found Q. The government's not, the intelligence community isn't going after Q. The law enforcement isn't going after Q. They're going after Qbies. They're putting Qbies in jail. They're talking about Qbies being so dangerous, but they're not going after their cult leader, right? They always go after the leader, right? They always go after, whether it's bin Laden or Jim Jones, they always go after the leader. The leader is the top priority, but they're not even looking for Q because Q is one of them, right? Q is them, right? Just, it's easy to figure out. And the amount of times Q was wrong and led people, like a Pied Piper, leading them away, right? Leading them over the cliff. And so it's all those things. But it was the behaviors and thinking that you knew things that you didn't. When you start announcing reality, when you're not that bright and you have limited information, you start saying, this is the way it is, and anybody who's against me is part of the problem, then you just suck. And that behavior is pervasive in the truth community. People who are just believing something that's not true really strongly and going out, going all in on it and then trying to drag you down with them. And so that's why the Qbies suck, right? And there's just all this stuff out there, all this predictive programming and things that surrounding the idea of a character named Q. Like, I've seen it in other shows. I can't remember it. My wife and I were watching something. We were like, oh, there's another character named Q that is like, total predictive programming type of things that is involved in something governmental, spy related or whatever. Okay, so let's move on to the other stuff here.